Wonderful. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Words. My name is Linda Ludke, and I'm a children's librarian at London Public Library, and I am tickled pink to have the pleasure of introducing wonderful Don McKay and Sally McKay. First, I'd like to thank London Ontario Arts Council and Museum London for this incredible festival. We are so lucky to be able to spend some time with Don McKay and Sally McKay today. So Don McKay, long considered to be one of Canada's most respected and celebrated poets, a member of the Order of Canada. He has twice won the Governor General's Award for poetry. And right here on the stage last night, Don was awarded the 2023 Words Lifetime Achievement Award. Don is a highly respected creative writing teacher and editor. He's taught poetry in universities across the country, including right here at Western, and he lives on the biggest rock of all in St. John's in Newfoundland. Now, Sally McKay is a Hamilton-based artist, curator, art writer, and educator, and works in performance, installation, and digital media. She's created animations, written art comics, and collaborated on a variety of zines. She has a PhD in art history and visual culture, exploring connections between art and neuroscience. So it is my great pleasure. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
And congratulations on your brand new children's book, The Rock Box. So, Don, you explored geology and rocks and the naturalist world in your award-winning books of poetry. Now, in The Rock Box, you bring your wonderful wry sense of humor and deep attentiveness to place and precise language to a whole new audience. So let me just start off by asking, what made you want to write a book for children?
It was the last thing on my mind. The publisher of the book, I'm answering your question in a roundabout way.
Yes.
The publisher of the book is Marnie Parsons. Marnie Parsons got a PhD from Western, an obscure university in London, Ontario, and I was her thesis supervisor years ago when the Earth's crust was still forming. She has wound up also in Newfoundland in a small outport called Torres Cove, and she has founded a publishing house. It's both fine press printing, that is, hand set, hand type set, and also trade books such as The Rock Box. She's become one of Newfoundland's premier publishers, and the premier publisher of children's literature. But she also publishes notable figures from Newfoundland like Andy Jones. Maybe you know Andy Jones as a comedian, devastating comedian. I have stories about that, but I'll tell you later. And so his whole sequence is called the Jack Tales, and it's wonderful. They're kind of Newfoundland folk tales updated and turned in Andy Jones' voice. So Marnie had the thought that we should have a children's book that devoted itself to the geology of Newfoundland, because rocks are what we have. You wouldn't have a lawns book for children in Newfoundland, But the benefit of living there is partly that geology is so evident. It's a lot easier for geologists than, say, geologists here, where you've got so much overburden. You have to sort of imagine what's going on way down there, where the rocks are. The rocks are visible, thanks to the ice ages, which came down, plowed all the topsoil off Newfoundland. Imagine these glaciers dumping them offshore, where they become the Grand Banks. They're very, very good for fish, but not very good for farming. And so what do they have? What's the big benefit? Rocks. And so she thought, there hasn't been a children's book about rocks for Newfoundland. So that's why Marnie got on my case, and I mulled it over. I did a lot of very bad things, attempts at it with an alphabet book and so on. Finally, I invented this character named Petra, rock, obviously, it's a bit more obvious, and started to write the story. I fell in love with her. And then the next thing happened was I had a thought, I wonder if Sally would like to collaborate. So that's where things took off.
Great. Now, Sally, often with children's books, the author and the illustrator they're kept apart during the creative process. Like they often never met, never even meet. Now, you've known the author since you were born. So tell us, how did that collaboration process work?
That's a great question. I was thinking about it because...
Would you like me to close my ears while you answer?
It's all right. When I was younger, there is no way I would have wanted to collaborate with my dad on a project. I grew up with two writers as parents, both quite well known. And so I wanted to sort of take my path in a different direction and not go into literature, went into visual arts. Still often had many conversations with people who would be like, your father is Don McKay? Your mother is Jean McKay? You're so lucky, blah, 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 blah. And I'd be like, yes, they're wonderful. Yes, they are very wonderful. But because I wasn't doing writing, the question of like, are you following in their footsteps never had to come up. And I'm very grateful for that. But now, this stage in life, I've done a whole pile of things and I don't feel like I have to justify myself as an individual separate from them. And so the opportunity came up to collaborate, and it was really fun to be working together on this project. Yeah.
Fun for me too. That's our official statement. We're sticking by it.
Well, there's often the assumption that creating a book for children is easy, or at least easier than writing for adults. So what would you both say to that?
No.
Right.
I say no,
Right.
It's not. No. It was totally different. Totally different, yeah. In a lot of different phases, and there was things changed. We got into a back and forth with the illustrations. The illustrations, when Sally saw the illustrations, said, "Oh yeah, that's what she's like." So it kind of, it's not only a children's book; it's a novel. I don't write stories. I don't even write short stories. So how did I get sucked into this? Yeah, that's right. Someone say it's the graduate student's revenge. Marnie thought, I'll get back at that guy who was my thesis supervisor. I'll suck him into writing a novel. Anyway, it was totally different. Yeah. But for you?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that, Dad's been writing forever, and this is his first kid's book, and I've been making art forever. It's my first time illustrating a kid's book, and it's a unique process. It's completely different. It was a challenge for sure. So I had been doing a lot of drawings just prior to this for zines and animations that I was making using a kind of process with colored markers and then scanning them and working back in. And I started off that way with the rock box, and it just wasn't clicking. It wasn't working for the to communicate, because the images have to communicate in a really they have to do their job of telling the story as well. So I kind of shifted up the process and started working with digital on Photoshop for all the color, but then doing line drawings and scanning and overlapping. And so there's actually quite a lot of technical stuff that went into the images here to get them feeling fresh and have that really energetic feel, but also with the sort of depth of detail and color that I wanted in them. So.
Well, that energy and that sense of fun really comes through in this marvelous book. So, let's take a deep dive into the rock box. Could you introduce us to Petra and her passions? Maybe could we have a story time? May I ask for a story time here?
I would suggest that we pass the rock box around.
That's a good idea.
Excellent.
This was another big turn with Sally collaborating, but also a friend from Newfoundland gave me a rock box. This is not the one he gave me. He loaned me a rock box. And then he found this rock box at a yard sale. I was just like, oh my God. These are samples of all the common rocks in Newfoundland and Labrador. In the 50s and 60s, a box like this would be circulated to all the schools in Newfoundland. It doesn't happen anymore. It's fallen off. It's gone all high tech, kind of. And so this is partly why why Marnie thought we should have this, and I quite agree with her. So this Steve Payne, who was the guy who found this, is a notable Newfoundland photographer, and he said, "Hey, you're into rocks. You'd like this." And I said, "I love it." And so when he found it, anyway. This is essentially the rock box that Steve Payne got, or the duplicate of the rock box that he loaned me. And now I own this, and I'm going to let you see it. Don't turn it sideways, or the rocks will fall out, and we'll have to find out which rock was in what niche, and that's a pain in the ass. So please don't do that. So we're going to pass this around. And should we talk about the characters? Would that be good? Yeah. Our heroes are basically the rock box, the star of the show, the magical. It's the equivalent of the wardrobe in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Okay. Not to give anything else away, you may have heard of that famous story, So the rock box is crucial. Petra is a young woman, a girl of 9, who is crazy about rocks and knows everything about rocks. Her parents don't. And so she collected rocks all over the place and so on. The third character, important character, I'm going to have to get my... the third important character is... a piece of labradorite, which is of course, this comes from Labrador. Not just Labrador, but its name comes from Labrador, and it was mined in Labrador for a long time. And the labradorite's nickname is Winky, because it winks at you. I'm going to Sally's going to take over now while I try and find what the hell I've done with my little rock collection here.
Here's my lucky rock. I'll lend it to you.
Oh, yes. That's an example of labradorite. Thank you. I'm going to get my big piece, and Sally's going to take over for her microphone now and say something else.
Okay, so one of the things that happens is a kind of relationship develops between Petra and Winky, and not to give too much away about what that relationship is or what happens, but she gets the rock box, and one of the rocks in the rock box is kind of twinkling and winking at her. Mm-hmm. And that's because it has this particular characteristic called Schillerization, which now Dad can jump in and correct me, but I'm going to try to explain it, is that when the light comes into the rock, it has these planes within the rock, and the light bounces around inside the rock. So it's getting reflected within the rock surface. And then you can see it has this kind of shimmer. So it's quite a unique and special. You better fix what I just said.
No, that's perfect.
Mr. Geologist.
That's great. There's a piece of polished labradorite that's coming around from table to table. And you can see, if you just turn it, you can see how that light, it looks like there's a light source inside the rock. And indigenous peoples, Inuit people thought, or said, it was the northern lights trapped in the rock. It gave that feeling. It was very poetic, and actually does it. That's exactly how it. So, as Sally says, a relationship develops between Winky and Petra, who, because she has, we'll read a passage in which we will talk about Petra's nickname after, right? Yeah.
Sure, yeah.
And this is a small piece. Do you mind passing that around too? It's a smaller piece of labradorite. So labradorite is also, if you should, like some people, not a million miles from this room, win the Order of Newfoundland, be awarded the Order of Newfoundland, the jewel in that order is labradorite. Because it's the Order of Newfoundland and Labrador. You don't just say Newfoundland, which we've been saying, but you shouldn't. It's Newfoundland and Labrador.
Well, what strikes me in this book is in the text and the illustrations, this marvelous sense of play. You know, it allows you to see things in a different light, like like the labradorite winking at you. Play isn't frivolous, is it? Poets and artists and kids like Petra can see the world in a different light. So, yeah, do you think that there are themes and concepts that you can explore in kids' books that kids understand much faster than adults?
Every time I talk about this book to anyone, they always say, oh, that would be perfect for some child that they know who has rocks all over their house. It's like, it's a thing. Yeah. Kids want to pick up rocks. And lots of adults also want to pick up rocks. But I think that there's this thing that rocks have and that maybe kids can relate to. So I don't know, in Hamilton, there's this whole thing where people are like painting rocks with like little happy messages and then putting them out around. Does that happen here too?
It happens in Newfoundland too, right?
And yeah, so I see them. And I mean, if that's bringing people joy and that's fine, and walking on a trail and there's a little rock painted with like a rainbow, it's like, oh, that's nice, or a little smiley face or something. But it's also a little odd because that rock itself has its own character, it has its own history, it has its own amazing internal compositions that tell of its history, and putting a layer of paint over it is kind of like a very sort of superficial human thing to do to a rock. And I think maybe this is partly why kids get into rocks, because they're looking and focusing. Each individual rock has its own story. And to be sort of comforted about this paint on the rock, it's so temporary, right? Like, one of the things we haven't touched on yet is the question of deep time. So one of the things that's in the book, and I think part of both of our interest in rocks, is that you get to sort of think about humans on the planet in relationship to the whole entire history of the planet. And conceiving of deep time is really difficult because it's numbers that are beyond human comprehension. How long ago, like the pebble that you trip on the sidewalk has a history that goes back so far. So one of the analogies for deep time that worked for me, I think it was Stephen Jay Gould, where he said, if you stick out your arm and you think of the length of your arm as the history of the earth, and then you take a nail file and you take one swipe off of the fingernail that's sticking out the end, that is humans in relationship to the rest of the time. So I think little kids picking up rocks are maybe not necessarily going to that whole level of contemplating deep time, but there's something about a rock that has all that within it, right? It's a kind of, it can communicate something about relationships of humans in the natural world. And so being able to access that through play at early ages, I think, is something to really encourage. Yeah.
That's really good. It's true that in Newfoundland, it's especially important that kids should be aware of this because deep time is very much present to them. For the same reason that the activity of the Ice Age is still there, just in your face. And it conditions the life you live. Why are fish important in Newfoundland? Because we have the Grand Banks. Why do we have the Grand Banks? Because of the Ice Ages. So there it is, And any rock you pick up in Newfoundland's got exactly that. And they're also present. So there's been several huge geological finds in Newfoundland. That's paleontological finds, fossil finds in Newfoundland that have revised our idea of the history of the planet. So Mistaken Point is the most famous of these. And in the Mistaken Point, you have the earliest fossils earliest life forms that are multicellular, more than one cell. 500 million years ago. That's 500 million years ago. And before these were discovered and before they were dated, and this has only happened in about the last 20 years, before we dated, we just had the Cambrian explosion at the Cambrian period. Suddenly, we had all these complex beings, like you get in the Burgess shell with all these kind of, claws and shells and so on and so forth. It was a big puzzle for Darwin. That's his theory. He said, well, things evolve. They don't just kaboom. And we had no evidence until Mistaken Point came along and we said, oh, there they are. And why weren't they preserved all over the planet? Because they were soft-bodied. And so the soft bodies decay easily. Well, Mistaken Point is huge. Our protagonist goes to a newer fossil find just as important as Mistaken Point on the Bonavista Peninsula. So she's deeply into that too. So this is part of where getting, and new discoveries are being made weekly in Newfoundland. So our book is trying to sort of coax kids also to be aware of this, not just to be some arcane part of the news, but something that happens to them. They could walk down on the shore and they could find a fossil that would be really, really interesting to geologists, and that happens. So that's part of our sneaky educational motive.
Stealth pedagogy.
Stealth pedagogy, we call it. That's right. Stealth pedagogy, but the surface is play. The surface is play, but all of the geology is truthful. It has the quality of fantasy, but it's actually, there's nothing in there that's false. We checked it with geologists to make sure, besides my own faulty geology sense. So we ran this by experts, and they were very, very helpful and also very supportive in doing this. So that's kind of our background.
Well, your book just does such a wonderful job of blending art and science in this fun rumpus room playground that kids' books really inhabit. And yeah, a lot of science is included in your book, and also a lot of play with words and language. So this book is about a love of geology, a love of rocks, but there's also a lot of puns. And I'm not taking these puns for granted in your books. I'm sorry, but they're
Pretty good.
but
Pretty good.
they're so, and I noticed many similarities. Well, in your book, there's a
Oh, this is a different book.
Your poem, a song for the song of the sandhill crane. So the sandhill crane makes an appearance in your children's book when Petra opens up the rock box lid and Winky speaks to her for the first time. I have to hear you say, how do you say that? Here.
It's okay, I have a copy. Yes, well, this is not actually the first time she uses it, but she has an encounter after she goes to bed, and it's sort of a dream sequence in which she encounters the Labradorite, and they develop this, as Sally's saying, this connection. And so she, it's up here, Sal. Thanks. Right beside you. This is on page 36, if you were following around at home. This is the language that the Labradorite says, the words that the Labradorite first says to Petra. Hummergaroo, clickety clack clack, rackety gackety garrorum, said the Labradorite, continuing to wink and hum. That's what he first says. And then it turns out, he says, oops, sorry about that. I addressed you in Neanderthalian. You completely forgot that Neanderthals have been extinct for what? 30,000 Earth years? I'll switch to, let me see, English. Although, frankly, it's not my favorite. Will it do for a chat anyhow? What should I call you, by the way? My name, said Petra, is no, actually, I prefer to be called Rocky. How about you? Labradorite is the name we attach to you because you are often found here, but I've been thinking about you as Winky. Would that be okay as a nickname? Winky, said the Labradorite. That will make a nice change.
Thank you. Now, Sally, your illustrations have fabulous infographic type information, lots and lots of science information, and also a lot of wordplay in your infographics. Could you talk about some of
Those were, we thought early on, I think it was Dad's idea to have like little sort of cartoony marginalia along with the bigger colored images. And that's something I've worked with in the past in other projects. And it's completely inspired by Mad Magazine and the little tiny cartoons that they would have in the margins that you could dig through and find. So yeah, we collaborated a lot on those because there was a few that had to be redone because I was trying to wrap my head around the actual science, and Dad knew it, and it was like, that's not right, and we redraft it. But some of them are pretty informational, and some of them are just silly. Like you said, the silent G.
Yes, the nice.
Yep.
And the not nice nat or the gnome.
Yeah. That's right.
And you really make abstract concepts concrete too, like the illustrated facts. I wrote this down. It would take a human about 15 years to count to 500 million, counting nonstop.
Yeah, that's like, I have several drawings that never made it into the book, trying to kind of get at to illustrate what I was talking about there about deep time. I think it works better through analogy than any other way, really. So.
Yeah, Stephen Jay Gould said that. Stephen Jay Gould, great paleontologist and well, kind of geological philosopher, said that if you say to somebody 20,000 years, they say, oh no, sorry, I meant 200,000 years. Okay. No, wait, sorry, I meant 200 million years. And they say, now, when you look inside your head, is there a difference between when I said 20,000, 200,000, and 200 million? It's the same closet. We can't get it with numbers. He says, you've got to get it with metaphor. So you have to use metaphor. And in some ways, this book is inspired by that. You've got to get it by story. Just say the Earth is very, very old. It's much older than you could possibly imagine. You have to go into the metaphor, etc. So partly that's part of our stealth pedagogy. And also part of that stealth pedagogy is Sally's humorous small drawings, the Mad Magazine-inspired drawings, which soften the hard facts and introduce play to that. So we're back and forth with play and education all the time in this book. Yeah.
Well, and there's an appearance of a very large toad as well. And that really brought to mind fairy tales. And when you think about it, fairy tales really they deal in deep time as well. Once upon a time, long time ago.
Yeah, yes. Yes, the thing about this stuff is that it has the quality of fairy tale, but it's actual.
Right.
And so we usually think that we're making a jump when we go from empirical science into fairy tale. Fairy tale's fun, science is boring, etc. It ain't boring. And it also has that quality of the fantastic, but we are part of that fantastic life. So I'm not speaking of the term, maybe Sally has a different motive, but that was part of what I was hoping to get.
Well, Don, there's a line in the book, a wise geologist from Newfoundland used to say, the truth lies in the rocks. Could you talk about who that was?
Oh, man, yeah. Well, the wise, we have footnotes, so the wise, this is what he identified, especially for kids in Newfoundland. There's a geologist, this sounds like a Newfoundland story, like Andy Jones. This geologist's actual name is Hank Williams. And he would give a talk. If he was up here, he'd say, don't bother Googling me, you'll just get that singer. Hank Williams, way back in the day when plate tectonics was still just a kind of quasi-theory, I took geology at Western. I took a course in geology at Western for geologists. Damn near flunked in the 50s. And in that course, at the end of the book, there was a paragraph that says, oh, by the way, there's this weird theory you might know about, the sort of circulating, called continental drift, plate tectonics. You just should know about it, that some people think this. Of course, if I'd taken geology 10 years later, That's the beginning of the book. And it's not a weird theory. It's the way things are. Hank Williams was right at that point. A Newfoundlander, grew up on the south side, St. John's, working on the docks, and the guy says, Hank, you're too smart for this, you should go to university. He said, what for? I go to rocks. So he did docks. He just, one of those. And he became the student of a guy named Tuzo Wilson at U of T. And Tuzo Wilson was one of the pioneers of plate tectonics. He said, it looks to me, and it's just evidence that the Atlantic Ocean closed up and then opened up again. Fairy tale, right? Mm-hmm. No, that's exactly what did happen. And Hank Williams looked at all the facts around. He said, I think Tuzo Wilson is right, and I think Newfoundland proves it. So at one point, Hank Williams, this is a story I don't want to go down, but I'll tell you afterwards. When Hank Williams and I thought he and I should collaborate on an article about this called Newfoundland, the Holy Ground of Plate Tectonics. So Hank's very huge, and he said, this is quoted quite often, the truth lies in the rocks. The truth lies in the rocks. So we have Winky saying, a famous geologist Winky tells Petra, who's now been calling herself Rocky, the truth lies in the rocks. Famous wise man said that. So that's where that comes from. Thanks for asking that. That's some of the sneaky, you can see the sneaky pedagogy going on here. We just leave that in the text. The Hank Williams story is in the footnotes. And also we get sort of places where the teachers could get more information about Hank Williams and plate tectonics if they want to,
Well, another sneaky message that I found in this book, it's really about the rewilding of rocks. And like Sally was saying, like not painting over them, but putting them back to where they belong. And that urge not to possess, but perhaps pay poetic attention to them. It's
wow. You've done your
children's
homework
books.
there.
So everything I need to know, I learned in a children's book. Honest.
Well, if that's there, that would be very gratifying for me. Thanks, Linda, for that. I appreciate that, because that's sort of that's the theoretical background. But don't want people actually saying, oh.
And it's also the rewilding of childhood too. Like Petra's in her happy place when she's out exploring the rock formations and yeah.
I'd just like everybody to know that the kingfisher just flew up to the lamppost and then down the river. Just to know that the natural what's going on while we're going through this high intellectual stuff. So yeah.
This is a perfect example to circle right back to what it was like growing up with Don McKay.
Right.
Constant pausing to look at a bird, or as my partner George was saying, we went on a drive in BC and we had to pull the car over to look at rocks on the side of the road. And oh, that's a very important example of.
Well, that was another question that I had. Yes. So were your childhoods like
burning.
Petra? Both of your childhoods, like where were your happy places out in nature?
When I was a child, I felt like I was being dragged along a lot of the time. Because we're short, me and my brother, and the adults go first and they stir up all the mosquitoes, and then they're all just like around our heads while we're like, when can we get back to civilization?
She's an incredible fantasist, really. She picked this up in the children's literature thing.
As an adult, that's the only thing I want to do, is be out walking in nature and various places. So certainly got seeded.
Looks like we're not going to fight after all. We were planning to do a short reading. Would that be all right with everybody? That's the right answer. Thank you. You're all going to get an A. And for this reading, we're going to read the first few pages of the book, and we'll do it in two voices. Sally Which hat? 3 voices. Which hat would you like, Sally?
I think that I want the 2 black hats,
Okay, here's the Leonard Cohen style black hat.
and you can have the puffin hat.
I'll have the puffin hat. Sally's going to read both parent. We're going to do role reversal and confuse genders, etc. So I'm going to read Petra part, and I'm wearing a toque with puffins on it. Would you like to hear about puffins? No.
This will be the
Very complex.
adult hat for either parent, because I think there's 2 parents' voices that come in here. Yeah, sure. Pass me one. You start. You read the first paragraph. And then I'll come in here.
Okay. All right. Rocks, rocks, rocks. Petra collected them wherever she went. Beaches, hillsides, barrens, cliffs, even from the gravel at the side of the road. In her bedroom, rocks sat on every surface. On a windowsill, the dresser, the bedside table, in boxes, in jars, in the drawers of her dresser among the socks and underwear, under the bed, in an old suitcase. They spilled over into the rest of the house. You might be surprised by a piece of quartz next to the butter in the fridge, or a lump of peridotite between the cushions on the sofa. There was sandstone in the hall and lava in the bathroom. It was, Petra thought to herself, a lavatory after all.
Another example of what it was like growing up with her mother said, "Look, choose a few favorites and put the others back where they came from." Her father said, "You must be searching for the Philosopher's Stone, are you?"
Isn't that from a Harry Potter book? Petra replied.
"Oh, it's much older than that. Back in the olden days, people who were called alchemists thought it was a magic stone that could turn other rocks into gold."
What about now?
"Well, nowadays, people like you who are crazy about rocks sometimes think there must be one special rock that speaks to them."
Rocks don't talk, said Petra, who felt she was too old for talking rocks, magic animals, and other fairy tale stuff.
"No, not usually," her father replied. "I guess they mean sort of speaking silently, without words. Anyhow, here's the thing. If you could decide which of your rocks was as special as the Philosopher's Stone, then it could represent all the others who could return to their native lands, or maybe Pippi Park, instead of cluttering up the house."
Petra thought about this. She happened to be holding her favorite piece of quartz in her hand. Whenever she held this rock, she remembered the path up to the ridge where the stripe of white quartz ran right through the dark siltstone like the stripe Aunt Gloria had put in her tear. Petra picked it up one day when the wind was so strong it wanted to blow her off the ridge into Conception Bay. You could see how the molten quartz had forced its way up through cracks in the siltstone, then crystallized into a white stripe that stood up like a spine, and the softer siltstone melted away. But when she put the quartz back on the windowsill and picked up a small piece of peridotite with its beautiful snakeskin surface, it seemed special. "I think all my rocks are philosopher's stones," she said. "Besides, some of them are minerals."
Said her father, which is what he always said when he couldn't think of an answer, but didn't want to agree with you either. "It's just that there's so many of them. Rocks and minerals, they're taking over the house. Yesterday, I almost swallowed a pebble instead of my multivitamin because it was sitting on the same shelf."
A sandstone pebble, Petra thought to herself, because she didn't want to interrupt.
"And your mother found a stone in her running shoe when she went to the gym."
"Oh," exclaimed Petra, "that's where my specimen of Cuckold's Formation conglomerate got to. I borrowed Mama's gym bag when I went collecting on Signal Hill. I hope she didn't throw it out."
"You'll have to ask her. And in the meantime, I want you to think seriously about choosing one of them to be your philosopher's stone.